Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
We want to remind you that the Distance Education Call Center is open 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. for any of your distance education questions, whether it's online testing support, virtual class support. If you have any questions for your DL, we are happy to support you at the DE Call Center. Also, if you need any training, they offer training. You can be 3 hours. They can attend a staff meeting to let you know what they have to offer. They can do things that are less than 3 hours. So go ahead and contact either the Distance Ed Help Center or your PD coordinator, and they can get with the PD specialist and arrange some training for you. I'm going to go ahead and welcome our presenter, which is Dr. Glenda Rose, and she's going to talk to you today about building effective distance learning programs in Texas AEL.
Hey, thank you. I've been in adult education since the 80s, and distance learning has been a passion of mine since the early 90s. So we're going to talk about specifically distance learning in Texas. We did 4 series webinars last month through the DEPDC, trying to get people to ramp up their distance learning. Texas is hovering around 15%, and I'd love to see that go up because we know how effective distance learning is for a program and student success. What we're going to try and talk about today in this Manager Monday, we're going to look at the benefits of distance learning. We'll talk about some of your options in the state policy guidance, and then we'll focus on some distance learning best practices. So some of this should be a review. A lot of these slides are going to come from the new Module 1. If you haven't taken Module 1 in a couple of years, it'll be new, but the content will be basically the same. But we want to think about how we can do it better. That's my big push, is I'd like to see more students doing it. We know from research in Texas, from research from Rosen and Vanek, which is national, that learners who engage in distance and blended environments outperform those who attend a traditional brick and mortar class. So if they are only going to a brick and mortar class, they do not perform as well. They don't reach their goals as quickly. They don't stay in the program as long as those who actually do some of that distance learning, blended learning outside. In your opinion, or in your experience, either one, what are the benefits to the students for using distance learning? And this means outside of class. So we're using these distance learning products like Burlington English, GD Academy, Aztec, North Star, whatever, outside. More practice. That's a really good one. Most of our classes don't have the intensity or length of time available in class to really get what they need to go, reach their goals faster. And we know that there's more people that need our services than we have seats that we can afford to pay for. So the sooner we can get them out of their seats and onto the rest of their lives, we can put somebody else in those seats and serve more people. Complementing what we're doing in instruction, that's blended learning. So that's actually really good. And then more access to what, Carol? Reaching students who can't attend regular class. Yeah, that's one of the ones that I like too, is when we have people, especially in Texas, people who are on the rigs or something like that, they can't always get to class. Getting the hours quicker, more gains in progress testing, reaching their goals quicker. See, I knew I didn't have to tell you guys all that. You guys got it? We know that those distance learning products can help review or practice what was covered during and after class. And I know as an instructor, there is not a single textbook out there that ever provides enough practice for my students to gain mastery over a content or concept. So we always have to have something additional to that anyway. And if they can work on it outside of class, the better. It also has been useful for me if I had students who missed class, if I could provide those materials for them or the content anyway, so that they can catch up and not feel like, oh, I can't go back to class because I've missed 2 weeks and I'm going to be too far behind. And then, of course, reaching those students we can't get. So this is some of the benefits to the students. What about the benefits to the program? What are some of the benefits that we have for the program? Number one for me, increased MSGs. I know I can get them to that pre-test, post-test MSG faster if I can get them on a distance learning product and using it. Getting them to be able to be progress tested. So you get those hours more quickly, you can get them to the progress test more quickly. And we are kind of graded on those MSGs, and it's one of the things that they consider when they look at the effectiveness of our program. So we definitely want to maximize that. It allows us to serve more students. There's some students who just cannot physically get to our locations. So distance learning gives us an option to serve those students who may not be able to physically get there. Let's go on. We reach more students, we increase retention, we can get more learners in a broader area, and we can help them get to their goals sooner. So like I said, you guys know this. I don't have to sell you on why it's important for the student, why it's important for the program. It also helps us with barriers. We have made some decisions in some programs, the program that I used to direct, that distance learning is not a substitution for childcare because you still have to have someone watching those kids while you're online taking class. The children cannot be a distraction for you and for your fellow students. But it does make it easier if you're in the house and you can have an older kid, for example, watch those younger children. So it reduces that barrier. Or if there's a transportation barrier, or if there's any kind of learning disability that might make it easier for you to participate from home than in a class where there's a lot more distractions. For me, what I have seen is that it's the time on task. It takes, they say 100 hours minimum to master, to move up a level. They say 5 points on CASAS is 70 to 100 hours. So the more time you can spend on task, the more quickly you're going to progress. But you also have the opportunity to repeat information. You can decide when you're going to study. You can decide where and how you're going to study, which feeds into those principles of adult learning with relevance and with self-sufficiency there. So self-directed learning. Those are all really good reasons for us to include it. We have this report in Teams that we affectionately call the None, Some, and Mostly report. And it's basically a table that tells you all of your students, how many of them have no proxy hours, some proxy hours, and then more than 50% of proxy hours. And this is the thing that we see historically over and over again, is the middle group tends to outperform definitely the people with no proxy hours, and usually more than the people with more than 50% of their proxy hours. So that tells me as a teacher, I want my students on distance learning. Look at the ESL numbers in the middle there, 29% if they're only in the classroom, and then it almost doubles, 44% if they're doing proxy hours. Well, that just makes sense, right? Because the more time you spend practicing a language, the more likely you're going to make a gain. And it's just very important that we keep that in mind. I don't know why we don't have 70 to 80% of our students in Texas using distance learning, because it's so beneficial to them. And we really need to get that information not only to our programs and to our teachers, but to the students. The students need to understand why it's important. They don't want to stay in our programs forever either. Well, most of them. I just pulled some random programs from 23-24 just to see if it was true last year. What do you guys notice about this chart? Did the statistics hold true for the None, Some, and Mostly report, that some is better than none or mostly? So Austin Community College did a better job of supporting their distance learners. They did a great job of supporting their distance learners. I agree with that. Everybody did pretty good by this. I have seen some programs that are using certain distance learning products inside of the classroom, and they're not really doing a good job of distinguishing when they're using them in and out of classroom. Yeah, 81% having more than 50% hours. How could that be? What would be the scenarios where 81% of your learners are having more than 50% of their hours outside of class? What would that situation look like? Scenario one is that the people in Brownsville are just really doubling down on their time outside of class and doing a lot of distance learning. You want to explain that? They could be double dipping because this is my concern.
Sure, it's when they're acquiring proxy hours at the same time they're acquiring direct hours or contact hours, and a sign-in sheet reflects that they're in class, but then the proxy report shows that they're on distance learning, so then they're double dipping the hours.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that there's some buttons on some of the programs that tell you whether you're with a teacher or without a teacher. And my concern would be just making sure that all the students were clicking that appropriately. Overall, if every program was doing like Brownsville and getting these kinds of numbers, I'd be really thrilled. 70% have some proxy hours. That's awesome. 70% of the students who used proxy hours had less than 50%. So their ABE students followed the pattern. Those with none did not do as well as those with some, and those with mostly did not do as well as those with some. That's the typical pattern. I remember when we first started distance learning back maybe around 2010, where people would tell me ESL students couldn't do distance learning, but look at the impact distance learning has on our ESL students. To go from 32% making progress to 73% making progress, that's huge. We want to make sure that we're definitely taking advantage of it. About the double dipping, this is really important, guys. It doesn't give us an accurate picture at the state. It doesn't let us report properly to the feds if we are putting that a student is recording their distance learning time, but they're actually in a class with a teacher. So if there is a teacher of record in the room and they are signed into that class, then those are direct hours. You do not count them again. You have to deduct them from any other time that you put in as proxy hours. And if you have any questions about that, talk to your PD specialist or your program specialist. They can certainly help delineate that. But it's really important that we are only counting the hours that the student does for an activity once and not making it look inflated like they're doing so much more than they are. So distance education, the formal definition is it's a learning activity, a formal learning activity. So you have a curriculum where the participants and instructors are separated either by space, geography, time, or both for the majority of the instructional period. So for the federal definition, that's our mostly. When we talk about distance learners, that's our mostly people. When we're doing Zoom classes like this is technically distance learning because we're separated by geography. It doesn't count for distance learning in Texas as proxy hours, right? Because this is synchronous. We're doing it in the same time. So as long as it's synchronous in Texas, it's not distance learning. As long as we're doing it in real time, we're with the teacher, then that doesn't count. It's only if it's outside of class does it count. We have a lot of terms that we've been using in distance learning. Distance education is the big umbrella. So if I say distance education, I'm talking about all of it. We have distance learning models, which there's 3 of those: clock time, learner mastery, and teacher certification. We have the remote instruction, which is kind of what we're doing right here, where I'm talking to you over Zoom. What's the difference between hybrid learning and blended learning? Hybrid is when the classes are both remote and in person. So hybrid could be that you have students who are in person and on Zoom at the same time. It could also be where you have designed your class so that you have specifically, intentionally have products that they can use outside of class. When it becomes blended is when it's on purpose. Let's go with the hybrid model of they use, let's say, Aztec outside of class, and then in class we're using the teacher's product, whatever, Kaplan, Macmillan, whatever we're using. So hybrid would be, I don't really give them any specific guidance on what to do on the Aztec outside of class. Blended means I articulate what I'm doing in class with the assignments that I make to them on the distance learning product. And guys, this is the best way to get students to their goals faster, is when you articulate the distance learning side with what's going on in classroom. That is where you're going to see the most benefit to the student. Flex learning, by the way, is basically just we give the student the choice of whether they're coming to class in person or remote, and they can switch back and forth. We have some places that do that. We did that a lot during the pandemic. It is a different teaching skill, but that does not count as distance learning because it's still synchronous. You're still with the teacher. The definition for us for proxy hours for asynchronous has to be an approved curriculum that's done outside of contact with a teacher. So they're not in contact with the teacher at that time. Here's those definitions: hybrid, synchronous, in-person, and remote, plus asynchronous distance learning curriculum, but it's not necessarily articulated. So blended, we have the synchronous, in-person, and remote, and it's integrated with that distance learning curriculum. And then the flex model, they can do either. So if you get confused about those, don't worry, everybody else does too. We try to keep them as clean as we can across the communication, but certainly call us on it if you aren't sure what we're talking about. Now, I'm not going to go over the state distance learning policy, but if you go to our website under the Distance Learning and Tech Integration Institute, which is the tcall.tamu.edu, and then click on the institute or just /dlti.html, the state learning policy there. It is really important that you keep up to date with that to make sure that you're in compliance with the rules and regulations that haven't really changed, but they might, and they might soon, to make sure you're doing distance learning the way that the state approves. Just a reminder, if you have staff who are involved in any way with distance learning, they must complete the training required by the state policy for distance learning. So this includes your administrators, if they're involved with it, your teachers in class who may not be assigned as a DA teacher, but if they're assigning Aztec as homework, then they need to understand what's going on. They need to go through the training. And then even Teams data people, in order for them to understand the difference between proxy and direct hours, they need to go through the training. So please make sure your staff are trained appropriately. We're going to continue. We just revised DLA 1. We'll do DLA 3 next to make it as appropriate as possible, but at least DLA 1 so that they know what the rules and guidance are. Make sure you follow the training requirements. If you have a curriculum that you want to use that's not on the list, and let me tell you, as far as states go, Texas is one of the most generous state offices as far as what distance learning curriculum is approved. Most states have one or two that they allow. We have a long list of things you can choose from to count for distance learning. And how that gets approved, the vendor, not the program. It used to be the program. Somebody asked me recently, and that's not the case. The vendor submits the request. It's reviewed by a committee that Lori puts together for the distance education approval committee. And then if we need a demonstration from the vendor, we get that. And then we decide whether that's going to be something that fits all of our boxes and requirements, like does it time out? Does it round the hours appropriately? All of those different rules that the state has. And if it is appropriate, then they'll go ahead and add it to the list. So that list changes quite frequently. When a vendor says, hey, I've got a new product, I would like you guys to consider putting it on the list. And if you come across something that's working really well and students are enjoy using it out of class, and you think it would check all the boxes for proxy hours being awarded, you might want to encourage them to go ahead and submit that. There's where you can get the list, same place, the DLTI section of the website, and then it's down here, approved distance learning curricula. Just a reminder, though, that it is the courses and the curriculum that are approved. It's not the vendor. So vendors sometimes can have multiple products. If they have multiple products, each product has to be approved. Just because the vendor is approved doesn't mean that all of the subsets of items are approved. So just make sure before you start counting proxy hours that the actual product from that vendor is approved, not just the vendor itself. Those proxy hours, which are those distance learning hours that are done asynchronously, away from the teacher, away from the program, does that include a lab? So let's talk about labs for a second. We have a student who goes to class Tuesday, Thursday. They come in on Wednesday to do computer lab work. So the question is there a teacher of record helping them when they go to the computer lab to work on their distance learning product? If someone is teaching them, if there's a teacher of record there that's going to be answering content questions, then they should sign in and those should be counted as direct hours. If it's a lab monitor, it's a student worker or somebody who's just going to help them with technical aspects, then they would not sign in for the program and you would count those as proxy hours. In order for us to do proxy hours, we need to make sure we know exactly how much time was spent, or the teacher has to certify that the work was appropriate and get the appropriate hours as indicated in the approved list. When we enter them into teams, do we put the data person as the teacher of record? So this is a consideration that I think programs sometimes overlook, distance learning students are still students, so they still need a teacher of record. It would not be the Teams data entry person. There needs to be a contact person. Now, if it's associated with their face-to-face class, that's going to be their face-to-face teacher, who then also needs to be trained. If it's not associated with their class, if it's a different class, then you need to have a person who is assigned to that class, who's responsible for those students in that distance learning class. Sometimes that's where it kind of falls apart. People will put students, for example, on Aztec. I'm going to put all my students on Aztec, but nobody's really tracking them or following them. That's not distance education. That is just giving them access to a product. If you're going to actually count it for proxy hours, you need to make sure that they have a teacher that they can contact if they have questions and somebody who's following up with them. If they could do it on their own, guys, they would have done it already. GED Academy is available at most of the Workforce Solutions offices. They could just go in there and work on it on their own. The problem is most people can't. They need somebody to hold their hand and help them push them through that distance learning curriculum. And when you put them in a lab, that's their proxy hours. So the teacher would be the teacher for the distance learning. So if they're coming in and I want to record those proxy hours, whoever is the teacher of record for your distance learning class is what's going to be in Teams as your teacher of record for that. You don't have to worry about who was in the lab helping them at that point. I don't have to record who the lab assistant was. As far as we're concerned, they're working independently, even though there's a lab assistant there. Just a reminder, not all homework qualifies as distance learning. So just because you assign something, it has to be on the approved curriculum. They have to do it outside of class. It's not something that I found this great program, but it's not approved yet. I had my students have it. I can track it. I can get a report, but it's not approved. So I still can't count it. It's just homework. And guys, there is nothing wrong with homework. Homework is a beautiful, necessary thing. If you want to get to your goal, somebody's going to have to do some homework at some point. All of us have gone through school. We all had homework. We didn't get credit for the homework. But in order to be successful, we had to complete it. So just keep that in mind. Homework's not bad. It's just not necessarily proxy hours. For managers, it's really important to remember the 12-hour rule. So they have to have those direct contact hours. They have to be in participant status for their proxy hours to count. They can get their proxy hours first. That is allowed. The problem is if then you don't get those 12 hours, you just gave them free time on a seat and you don't get any credit for that in the system at all. So the best practice, of course, is to get those 12 hours up front, make sure that they are in participant status before you give them access to your product. But there may be situations, maybe you have a long waiting list and you want to put them on distance learning so that they don't lose interest before they get into your class. You can do that. You can make a decision to do that. But then you really want to target those folks and get them into class as soon as possible and get them 12 hours. So just keep that in mind. Best practice, get the 12 hours up front, but it's not a rule that you have to get those 12 hours up front. You just have to get them those proxy hours to count for you at the end of the year. I have been known when I've had a student who had 11 and a half contact hours to at least get on a phone call or a Zoom call with them for 30 minutes to get up to that 12-hour mark so that their hours would count. Keep an eye on your reports and make sure you're not losing that, because this usually happens, by the way, with GED students. It tends to be the students who are getting ready for their GED. They take off on the GED prep content, whether it's GED Academy or Aztec or whatever you're using, or they're ready to take the test. I will hold their voucher ransom until I get to that 12-hour mark. They do need to have those 12 hours if they've been using my products before I will let them get that voucher. You know, we need to make sure that we're fulfilling all the requirements under WIO as well, as far as showing what we're doing and being able to demonstrate that we're helping students get through that test. I had a really weird question recently. I was told that there was a program for their distance learners. So these are people on their distance learning product that are primarily going to be using distance learning. They were told that after they got their 12 direct hours, they could no longer record direct hours for those students. So these were students that were put into specifically a distance learning program. They were not going to have regular synchronous meetings with their teacher. They were told that they only had to have 12 hours and they could have no more than 12 hours. Well, that's nuts. You need to be in contact with, especially those students who are studying on their own. And so you want to document as much of your contact with those students as possible. I don't know where that rule came from, but it's not an actual rule. They, of course, can have more than 12 direct hours. We want them to have more than 12 direct hours. Maybe they're thinking in teams, because then you have to divide on whether it's on the P line for proxy or the D line for direct, but you can In that distance learning class, you can put direct hours if you have them. You just put them on the D line. You want to track that. You want to track what people are using. So the ways you can do that is have a sign-in sheet if they're having synchronous meetings, or use a Zoom report if you're doing it on Zoom or Teams. Have a Teams report that shows when that student came in and went out of your remote class, or have them sign in on a Google form, sign out, sign in chat, sign out on chat. Any of those things will work. If you're in real time texting, like a real conversation, not like delayed texting, anything you text me will be delayed texting. But sometimes you'll have students that'll be texting back and forth for like 20 minutes trying to figure something out. You can actually print that out. You can use that as documentation. If it's on any kind of social media like that, all of that counts towards direct hours if it's over 8 minutes. So we want to make sure that we keep up with that and record those hours. Yeah, it's so much easier on Zoom now that we have reports. Yay. That's clear to everybody, right? You do want to track those direct hours. Phone calls. I used to keep a phone call log. So I would know how long I stayed on the phone, what we talked about, and that way I could record those phone calls as direct hours as well. I will say I was kind of shocked when somebody said that to me. I couldn't imagine why you would limit a student to 12 direct hours. So basically, they were getting more than 12 direct hours. Nobody was recording them. And you definitely want to record that. Affects your progress testing timeline, right? If you're not recording those direct hours, then it's not showing that they have enough hours to test. You want to keep up with all of that. Let's talk about best practices for building community. What are some things you guys have done to build community in distance education? So you've got students that are all over the place. How do you build community with them?
Abilene did like holiday parties or like monthly community get-togethers to try and bring in some of those who do the distance learning and have a sort of a time of connection with them.
Yeah, which is also a great time to post test. Certificates, who complete at least 24 proxy hours. It's encouraging them to do it. They love those certificates. I'm always shocked when I go to a student's house and they have one of these little certificates I printed as a teacher on the wall in a frame. They accomplished something. They're very proud of that accomplishment. We're working on having our DL lead have office hours. Office hours are a good idea. Just make sure that your students understand what the office hours are for, because there's some research that shows at the colleges anyway, what the professor thinks the office hours are and what the students think the office hours are not the same thing. So students don't show up because they don't realize that's an opportunity for them to basically get some one-on-one assistance. Online parties are a great idea. There's an example of a communication log, how different ways we have talked and what we did. I used to keep a page for each student in a notebook. I would just keep a log because I have no memory, y'all. My memory is so bad. So I would just keep a page so I would remember what we talked about. And that way, the next time we talked, I could go back. And way to build community is actually asking about, how did your child's science fair go? If they had told you that they were doing something like that. I just strongly recommend keeping notes so you can remember, especially if your memory's not strong. Use those communication tools. There's all kinds of communication tools out there. This is an example from Ashley when she was at Literacy Council of Tyler, which is now PACE. Using Remind is an option, or you're using Google Classroom or an LMS like Canvas or Blackboard. You can send messages out to students. You can encourage them, have discussion boards, try to keep them engaged between classes. I used to use WhatsApp as long as people know that they're sharing their phone number with my ESL students, because most of my ESL students already had it. That's why I used it. Just make sure they know they're sharing their information. There's lots of things that you need to do to help students stay engaged. Think about it yourself. If you're taking a course and you tend to forget about it, there's 3 courses I signed up for here at the university, and I just remembered this morning that I haven't finished them because nobody's really contacted me about them. They just went to the back of my mind, and now I need to go in and work on them. And then this is another example. She created a Padlet, so every time she had one of her GED students graduate, she could just put up pictures and say, hey, these people have graduated. One of the most encouraging things to students is to see other students who have succeeded. What are the things besides Padlet could you do to celebrate your distance learning students? We have follow-up Fridays. She tracks student activity and call those students if they've not been actively working. Excellent. That was my Fridays too. Friday was my day I set aside to look and see who I needed to contact and also make my plan for the next week of who I needed to test. Social media, if it's allowed by your center. A digital inspiration wall. Yeah, I think it's a great idea too. And then students make the post, right? So they're posting their pictures that they choose. Contacting students, finding out what's going on if they're not doing their proxy hours. That's really important. That's why I think it's important to have a distance learning teacher, not just a distance learning coordinator, but a teacher. If the distance learning is not part of the face-to-face class, if it's a separate entity, it needs its own teacher to be able to follow up with those students to be successful. Also, you want to make sure that you're modeling citizenship. So if you're uploading a picture, upload your picture first and so they can see what kind of picture is appropriate. Anybody ever have a student upload a picture that was inappropriate? Or get on a Zoom and not think about where they were or how they were dressed? We need to teach students about digital citizenship. It's not automatic. Online etiquette is not automatic. If you look at the social media, it seems like anything goes. But when we're talking about a more formal interaction online, which is what a lot of businesses use, we need to help them with understanding what is expected in terms of appropriate language, when to use emoticons, to think about what they're saying before they send it. Anything else that you guys think of when we're dealing with our online students about helping them think workforce ready, guys? It's not just about being in my class, it's how am I modeling the digital communication for when you go to work? They actually talk about online etiquette, cover those kinds of things. Do you talk about boundaries too? Do you have students who text you at 2 o'clock in the morning? Because I did until I put a wall up and said, no more. That's it. I actually had to make a rule. I told them my phone goes on do not disturb at 9. If you text me after 9, when I get up at 4, I'm texting you back. But yeah, definitely know where their resources are. Part of digital citizenship is knowing when to get help and how to get help. So I just think it's important to keep those kinds of things in mind. I had a student, I told you I had a WhatsApp group, a post that they had received that basically was a scam. It was about getting some free food from Walmart. So that was a teachable moment, right? It was an opportunity for me to tell them, okay, I'm going to take your post down, and here's why I'm taking your post down. But being able to share how to interpret when something has red flags, not to share it with other people. So we want to take advantage of the digital environment to teach them how to be safe in the digital world as well, or safer. We talked about office hours. We talked about using real-time tools. If you can bring them into a group setting, into a synchronous online class and play a game, but even if you can't, like Kahoot has a version where they can compete against each other. I do this with my QuickBooks Online class. They have the Kahoot that they can play as many times as they want to see if they can outscore each other. So even though they are not in class together, they're able to see each other and how they're doing on that game. So those kinds of tools make for interaction and build community as well. A little bit of competition never hurt anybody. And then having check-ins, weekly, monthly check-ins with people, just to make sure people know that you're there and that you're helping them get to their goals. These are specifically the ones that are out on the oil rig. They don't come to a physical class. They're doing distance learning on their own. We want to make sure that they stay engaged. So these are some of those ideas to keep them engaged in the class. Now, on my side, because most of my classes were doing distance learning, but they were in my class, for me as a classroom teacher, it was my goal to look at their reports and see who was doing distance learning and to acknowledge them and recognize them in class for doing that out of class work and giving their certificates for completing so many proxy hours and recognizing when they completed units and those kinds of things. I think that's important from the hybrid class where they're doing both. It's important to recognize and reward the students who are doing that outside of class work. There are people on standby 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. to answer questions about technology, including the distance learning platforms. They've been trained on the distance learning platforms. So if a student is working on the weekend and gets stuck on Burlington English or Aztec or whatever they may be using, they can either call on the phone or they can go to the website and jump on a Zoom immediately. They click on the link in the Zoom and somebody answers the Zoom, or they can chat with them. There's lots of different options for them, for the call center, to get help. And if you were not aware of it as a teacher, I'm just letting you know that if you get stuck on technology, they're also available to you. So you can do the same thing. You can go to the website, You can jump on a Zoom call with them. You can call them on the phone. You can chat with them to see if you can get help with that. Technology happens to everybody. I have been doing tech training most of my career, and there are still times when the tech outdoes me. Tech happens. The main difference between somebody who is comfortable with tech and somebody who's not is I expect something to go wrong, and I usually have a plan first to troubleshoot for myself and to know when to stop and when to get help if I need it. Please use the Distance Education Call Center. It's there for you and it's there for your students. They can even come to your class virtually and show your class what they can do if they need help, if you want to call them and make an appointment for them to do that. Here is their contact information. That's their website, textdistanceedhelp.com, their phone number. Like I said, they're happy to come and share with your students how the students can access these tools for when they're studying independently. Has anybody ever started working on something and then just got so frustrated with the tech that you just said, I'm not doing this right now? I'm sure. I know I have. I'm like, nope, I will come back to this later. So we want to make sure that everybody has access to help when they need it. And we're grateful for TWC for providing that resource for us as a state. And I really would love your help helping encourage our colleagues to get that number from 15% up. Let's get more students doing it so we can get more students through the system and help more people.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.